In today's video, I want to share how your ability to adapt asana really lends itself to how well you can cue, how impactful your cues are, how meaningful the modifications are and purposeful that you provide for people, plus those variations, and your overall sequencing within your class, and just your ability to really bring forth throughout the majority of your class the essence and the philosophy of yoga. So let's look at cues. Now, some cues that we use can often feel very repetitive. We feel a lot of times like we're saying the same thing over and over again. Our cues can feel outdated or just not actually relevant to what we see in front of us. And again, this is part of the skill of learning to adapt your classes. And they can feel excessive, like we're saying so much of something, but perhaps it's not needed. How can we still support our students without having to say too much or something that just isn't really necessary? Through learning to adapt your classes, these things are automatically addressed, and it will give you so much more confidence with your cues and so much more context and purpose and meaning with your cues, so that they really help your students, again, come back to that personalization and that customization no matter what size of class you're teaching, so that your verbal guidance is really supporting your students within their transformative experience. Modifications also become so much more proficient and impactful when you learn how to teach this adaptive asana method. Oftentimes we give modifications that are not really suitable for the individual person and their needs. And with this adaptive asana method, you're going to be able to give modifications that are much more purposeful, effective, and contextual. So these modifications, through your knowledge of adapting asana and adapting your classes, you will be able to provide a modification that is purposely designed to target a specific area of the body or achieve a specific outcome for that individual student. So inherently, that makes the variation or the modification that you offer so much more effective, and the context of the modification that you offer really does become a lot more considered with this adaptive asana method. And what I mean by that is that if you have a student who needs a modification for a particular pose, and you're giving them a modification that requires a wall or props, but it's within the context of a flow that is a little bit faster, that is not going to work. So when you learn how to use this adaptive asana method, you will offer modifications that are so much more considerate of the context in which your students are practicing within. When you know how to adapt asana using this method, your classes will have so much diversity, so much variety, and your sequencing just becomes so much more comprehensive and transformational for your students. It's really important to keep things fresh and keep your students engaged and allow things to really be creative for you, so it feels like it's an enjoyable experience for you. However, sometimes we fall into the trap of trying to use our sequences to entertain our students, and this then leads to them often being very overstimulated. And most times our students are already very overstimulated, just considering our modern day world. And so with these two things, it really does create a situation where you feel like you're constantly having to hold their attention and look at this shiny thing here, look at this shiny thing there. So when we learn to adapt asana, it adds a fresh, diverse, varied approach to our sequencing that is really coming from the foundations and the purposes of the classes being more accessible, more progressive, more inclusive, and a lot more transformational for our students, as opposed to them coming from this need of, I've got to entertain them, look at this shiny thing over here, and then they become overstimulated, and this actually can gradually create a disconnect for your students within themselves. So the skills that you'll learn when it comes to adapting asana really does fuel your ability to offer your students a very powerful perception shift. And this is a perception shift that takes them out of a performance mindset and shifts them into a practice mindset. And that is really what we are offering. And this might be something that you reflect on as a teacher as well. Are you facilitating a yoga performance for your students, or are you facilitating and holding space for them to practice? Now, I reckon that you will probably say that you want to facilitate an experience for them where they can practice. But what ends up happening oftentimes is when we don't know how to adapt asana, we keep our students in this performance mindset. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper into the mindset of your students and into like the modern day yogi in another video, but just for now, keep this in your mind, and you might even start to reflect on where you might observe that your students are performing their practice and where they're practicing their practice. You might observe where you as a teacher are perhaps encouraging them to move with a performance mindset or to approach things with more of a practice mindset. So on that note, I want to finish this video with an understanding of what the definition of a practice is that best relates to a yoga practice. The actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method as opposed to the theories relating to it. Now, for me, this is just the perfect way to convey the application of the theories of yoga and how we utilize them in practice. And that's not just on the mat. That is obviously off the mat as well. But as yoga teachers, the time that we have with our students is on the mat. That's where we get to help them implement these ideas, these theories, and these beliefs about yoga, actually applying them as opposed to just the theory that relates to it. And this just conveys that a practice is not about adhering to specific ideologies or dogmas or rigid ways, but the true essence of what we deliver within our classes in terms of how we help our students practice and access yoga really has more to do with how we practically apply it. And that is why it is absolutely necessary as a yoga teacher, if you want to offer a transformative experience for your students that helps them align with yoga philosophies and connect with themselves, that you learn how to adapt asana. And in doing so, you're able to then assist your students with a much more potent and powerful way to utilize the theories of yoga and the philosophy around yoga in order for them to connect with their own personal needs, their own intentions, and really discern and reflect what it is that they need in their practice anytime that they step on their mat, and then how that is taken off of their mat and into the greater wide world as they go and interact with other people and the world around them.